Hello and welcome to the Royal Record here on GB News. I'm Cameron Walker, GB News' Royal Correspondent.
And I'm Svar Nanan-Sen, Royal Editor of gbnews.com.
And we've got a special treat for you today. We're going to be talking about Catherine, the Princess of Wales. A brand new biography is out now with the royal biographer Robert Jobson.
We'll also be taking a look at Harry and Meghan's 4-day tour of Colombia and whether it was a success.
And King Charles has reportedly taken away his brother Prince Andrew's security. What does this mean now? Is he going to be forced out of Royal Lodge? Well, we're joined now by Robert Jobson, the royal biographer and author of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Robert, welcome to the Royal Record here on GB News. First of all, the Princess of Wales has had an extraordinarily tough year with a cancer diagnosis, the world's spotlight and scrutiny on her. There is such intense global interest in the Princess of Wales, and it's in the year that you have written a biography on her.
Well, I started working on this book about 2021 when the publisher, Bonnier, came to me and said they would like a book written about her. That was Belinda Mann, the CEO. We had a lunch. And so I started working on it about 2021, signed a contract then. Obviously, a lot changed between 2021 and publication this year. My AFAT wrote Our King, and obviously we had a complete change of transition of the monarch in the crown and the monarch. So obviously that was a change. So then I went back to it about a year ago and started working on it then. So, a lot of people saying, you've written a book very quickly. No, I haven't. It's been a long time in the writing and the planning. It's a book. I think that quite rightly that Catherine is a bit of an enigma, and I think people want to know a little bit more about her. So I try to keep in one book a complete story of her journey, not focus solely, as a lot of other books do, on the her early years, but really looking at what she's done since she's become the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall before that, and her role as a royal. So it's more of that really. And I think I've painted a pretty clear picture so far. It seems to be well received. It's number one in second week running of the Sunday Times bestsellers list. Made the New York Times bestsellers list, and number one in Italy, and made the list in Australia. So it's doing well as a book since it was launched. But I think that says a lot about the interest in her, Catherine. Yes, she's had a tough year. She's had a couple of, so we have seen her twice since that very emotional and courageous announcement of a diagnosis and treatment. Once at the Trooping with the children, and the other time at Wimbledon when she got a standing ovation as she entered the royal box, as you remember. So she's a very, very popular person. But I just wanted to, and speaking to people close to her and around the circle, try to present a picture of her as a working royal and as a mother and as a person.
And I suppose they are kind of two key themes, aren't there? There's the Princess of Wales as a working royal, the public-facing role, but also equally important to her is her family private life.
Probably more important, actually. I think that the reality is this is a woman born, her grandfather on her mother's side was a painter and decorator. She's born to the real world, unlike her husband and even her children and her father. These people that would never have to worry about a mortgage or what job they're going to do. These are people that are, who, though they try to be ordinary, and I've covered the story, royals for 35 years, so they try to be, but they can't possibly understand what it's like to be one of their subjects, really, because they would never have had to face the same problems, issues. Somebody like Catherine and her family will have done. They've had to build up businesses. They've had the problems of that business going to the wall during the pandemic. You've got real life issues that have hit them over the years. She went to work on a double-decker bus, and I'm not saying that she's not privileged. She went to some of the best schools in the country, Marlborough College, went to one of the best schools in the country. But that's not the point. The point of it is that was an aspiration of her parents to spend that money and pay that money. It was money that was hard earned. So I think it's very important that this woman that is who is really in touch with people, she's far from common, even though she's a commoner. She is in touch with real life issues and therefore can understand them. And when you're raising your son George to be the next king in a very different, after William, in a very different world where there isn't the same level of deference. There may not be the same level of commitment to a monarchy. It's quite important that they get to understand what the people will expect and what the people themselves are going through. And I understand that people like William are very in touch, as is the King, but they cannot possibly, they've never had to go to work on a double-decker bus. It's not the same as having experienced it in real time in the real world.
And Robert, you referenced Kate's family there. How important do you think the Middleton family as a whole has been in helping the Princess of Wales adjust to royal life?
I think she's a star, Catherine, to start with. I think she's somebody that is a real go-getter. She seems to rise to every challenge that's been put in front of her. And of course, having a stable and loving family is very important. I mean, when she was at university, her dad used to send her clippings from newspapers, things that she should read and things he suggests. This is the family that really care about each other. She's got two pretty grounded parents, pretty grounded siblings. Siblings that have been through trouble. James is suffering his own depression and coming through it the other side. So I do think that she's had to deal with real life issues, and that really does make a difference. Yes, William and Harry had to live out their life in the drama and the glare of publicity, and that's difficult. But really, the real life problems for them is not really how much money's in the bank. William now is generating £25 million every single year from the Duchy of Cornwall. So, he's never had to worry about the mortgage payment. So this is the sort of issues that I think that Catherine will bring to the table when it comes to their time on the throne. And I think it's hugely important in a time when the monarchy is not, when Queen Elizabeth came to the throne, there was a sense that she was appointed by, she'd got that role through God. It was a far more Christian and different society to the one that we live in today. And there was certainly more class involved in terms of the middle class, the working class, more structured. And there was certainly a level of deference to the royal family. Well, I don't think that deference is necessarily there or is going to be there in 30, 40 years' time. Certainly, the realms, I would have thought, quite possibly would have gone by then in terms of Australia, New Zealand, Canada. It's a very different picture that George, when he eventually, if he does get to become king, will inherit. And I think that's why it's so important that his mother is there to help him. And I think she's identified that as possibly one of her, if not the most important role that she has.
And speaking of society, one of her key working points is this focus on the early years and how by nurturing that first 5 years of a child's life, it really can impact society for the better. And you mentioned in your book that there's a lot of work away from the engagements behind the scenes on Zoom calls with charity chief executives or reading reports. So it's not just what you see for the hours engagement on the surface, is it?
Yeah, very much that. I mean, she always brings her A game, I think, to the table. We saw in Boston, I remember you being there when she went to that big meeting with all the academics, professors, whatever. Many of them come out realizing that she was really on top of her A game and on top of the subject. I think it's quite interesting. Her own early years was so important because she was living abroad in Jordan, where she had a lot of exposure to very diverse classroom. They would be 1 minute quoting from the Quran, 1 minute from the Bible. They were singing songs of different faiths and different backgrounds. So that was obviously very important to her. I think it actually helped make us such a balanced person, and that's why I always found the ridiculous claims of racism made against her were simply that, utterly preposterous. But what's important here is that she has identified a subject that she can really make a difference in, and it is making a difference in. And you don't have to be at every single engagement all the time. The work that's going on behind the scenes, it may be, advantage to us in the media to see her more, but actually what she's doing behind the scenes is just as effective, if not more so, by her not being. She's actually on top of that brief in a way that I think other members of the royal family haven't been in the past. And I think it's the way that both William, the Prince of Wales, and Princess of Wales are going to go do things going forward. because they can get more done that way. I mean, we've seen it with Earthshot. We've seen the way that a lot of work has gone into a specific issue, and it's really making a difference. So I think that's the same with the early years with Catherine. And I think also going forward, it's the way we're going to have to sort of get used to it a little bit, because, I don't think we're going to have a whole series of engagements listed for the next 6 months saying what Catherine will be doing, so that when she doesn't turn up because there may be a reason, both medically or whatever, that she can't do it, that we can start writing, oh, what's happened to her? I think they're going to have to handle this a little bit more intelligently, more in a more adult way, so that they will announce things if and when they're going to happen within a few days, so that there can't be that list of, is she okay, is she not okay? Equally, I don't think that I get a sense that her filling her diary completely with public engagement is not necessarily the right way forward, particularly at this stance at the moment, because at the moment, William it was pretty crestfallen, I would say, from when he heard the news of his father, and then he heard the news of, obviously, of Catherine. But he's risen, I think, cometh the hour, cometh the man. I think he's shown a great strength of character in the way he's operated his business. And I think that she realises there's a dual role that they both have at the moment, whilst they are heirs, which is the key, is making sure their young family is safe, understands what's expected of them, and they can help raise them in the appropriate way, whilst we have the king on the throne.
And building on that, Robert, one of the things you talk about in your book is the relationship between Catherine and the king. How important do you think King Charles feels the Princess of Wales is to his royal family and its future?
Well, he knows how popular she is, and he also is fully aware, that there's a glamour side to royalty, as well as it being a constitutional institution. I mean, and she is the glamour side of that institution, and therefore, in terms of the popular press and television, he realizes that if he's going to be at an engagement or she's going to be engaged, then most 9 times out of 10 the cameras will be focused on her. He doesn't have a problem with that. And maybe when he was with Diana all those years ago, he may have done it. Who knows? But the reality now is he appreciates her. He calls her his beloved daughter-in-law. He appreciates the way that he can get access to his grandchildren whenever he wants to. He appreciates the fact that she is such a loyal and devoted servant to the crown, and he's recognised that in the honours that he's given her, as well as the way you can see that they interact in public together. I think it was significant too that when she was about to announce the terrible news, really, that she was being treated, that she had lunch with the king just prior to that, and they talked it over. And I think probably this cancer diagnosis has probably brought them closer together. I mean, all the stuff that they was in and out at the hospital and it was constant contact is nonsense. I think they saw each other once when they shared the hospital appointment. I think both were focused on getting well. But at the end of the day, he's found in Catherine a beloved daughter-in-law who, when there's issues with his son William, and there have been a few over the years, both quite strong-minded people, she's been able to smooth the path to an easier route, and that's always been very helpful, because the king is not someone who's ever liked confrontation. So to have someone who's a solution finder like Catherine at the hub and the heart of the royal family is very, very helpful. She gets on swimmingly with the Queen Camilla, which is, she did all those photographs for her, but they also get on very well. And I think that's very important to the king as well, because both these ladies are hugely important in his life.
And I think you mentioned the fact that when the Princess of Wales first came on the scene and started dating William and they got engaged, the late Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were both kind of delighted that she wasn't somebody who would be bringing drama to the royal family. She was kind of no nonsense, no fuss, kept herself to herself.
Well, we've seen a lot of drama and a lot of nonsense, haven't we, from Meghan and Harry in the last few years. What is wonderful about Catherine is she's devoid of that. She rises above that. There have obviously been moments when she could have, caused issues, but she doesn't. And that's the point that the Queen, there's a similarity there with the Queen. I remember being at an event when she was expecting, and she had, when she went to Baker Street tube station with the Queen and Prince Philip. I was covering the event, and she was handed a little badge with baby on board, and it was all. But she, at no stage did she try to undermine or be the star attraction in front of the Duke of Edinburgh and the Queen. Both Duke of Edinburgh and Catherine both, were there supporting the Queen, and that's something you get a sense of whenever she's even with William or with the King. She's not trying to steal the limelight, even though the media will always give her that limelight. She just tries to play the role, I think, in a perfect way, which is to play the supporting role, and she has done that, I think, from the very outset. We all know she's a very beautiful lady, and she's somebody that's, I think, got a great personality, great soul. She's quite funny, but she does know how, when and where to. If it's her event, yes, she's the one who's going to be the star attraction. But if it isn't hers, and there is a higher-ranking role there, she does do that very well. I think she did it very, very well whenever she appeared with the late Queen Elizabeth, and she does so again when she's with the King. I think she gets it spot on.
Robert, and something that you touched on in your book that really caught my attention was a dispute between the King and William over a particular helicopter journey that Catherine and the children went on. Could you give us an insight on that?
Yeah, it's not a particular one, actually. What it was, it's something that the late Queen Elizabeth II raised with William. I think it was just before she was at the Chelsea Flower Show, if I'm right. And William, he's an accomplished and very skilled pilot, but he was flying quite regularly from Kensington Palace up to Animal Hall and to take the children up there. And that's all the family, Catherine and George, Charlotte, and Louis. And the Queen did raise this with him, and I have authority that she did. And he still did it. He still flew up. And I think that quite peeved her, irritated her a little bit, and she raised it. Now, since the King's diagnosis, I think he raised a similar point with William via one of his aides. I know which aide, I won't bring them into it. And it led to a bit of a confrontation between the aide and William, which wasn't great. But basically the issue was raised because the King is saying, if something happens, and he's not in any way doubting William's ability as a helicopter pilot, is a trained pilot himself, and he realises that there's dangers involved in everything. But having them all flown together in a helicopter, I think, was seen as not really acceptable. And he asked William to sign a disclaimer saying that if anything happened, it'd been raised. Now you might ask, what's the point of that? Well, what it would do if you had to sign a document is really focus your attention on what you're doing, without a doubt. And also, it doesn't, I don't think it would necessarily stop someone doing it, but it's saying it's definitely your responsibility. And as a future king himself, you've got to look at the line of succession. And the line of succession would mean that it would be King Harry and Queen Meghan on the throne. And it's something that, the king is asking William to consider.
And just on that, William stopped flying with Charles when he was age 12. Do you think we'll see something similar where Prince George takes a separate flight from William next year when he turns 12?
Well, I suspect that. I suspect that it will be something that's got to be considered. The fact that the king has raised it before George is 12, I think is important. It's, you want, when you've had a cancer diagnosis like the king has had, and the treatment he's had, he's obviously thinking about his own mortality and the future of the monarchy, and that involves Prince George very much so, left, right, and centre. So I think that it's quite important that I can understand William's frustration, because if you've got to separately get one child, take a different route, it can be quite awkward if you're going on holidays and things like that. I'm not so sure that if you're going like on a commercial flight or something like that, it would be so necessary. But helicopters do tend to focus the mind. We've had a few billionaires, haven't we, that have crashed in helicopters, who must have thought with their wealth and experienced pilots and wonderful helicopters that they were indestructible, but they weren't. So I do think that it's just a question of making sure that the monarchy and the line of succession is safe.
Robert, you've been covering the royal family for decades, and you have seen the Princess of Wales's evolution, I suppose, from early courtship. Perhaps she was a bit nervous to start with, to the Princess of Wales she's become. Where do you see her going in the future, into her future role as one day Queen?
Well, I think she'll continue very much on her focus of raising her family. They're still very, very young. And I think that whilst the king is on the throne, with Queen Camilla at his side, that is perfectly acceptable. I think we'll probably see more work and more public engagement by maybe William on his own, international travel, etc. That will definitely happen. And I don't think they like the idea too much of them spending too long away from the children. And so them doing solo engagements is quite possible. But I'm definite we've seen that with Catherine quite recently before the diagnosis. So I think she'll focus on her early learning projects, and I think that will really be the main focus of her charitable work. There are other areas, but I think that will be, it's all intrinsically linked. As we move towards the next decade or so, she'll play a more supportive role, I think, with the Prince of Wales, her husband. And eventually as Queen, it will be very much in that role. It'll be very much in the vein of the Queen, the late Queen Mother, and the Duke of Edinburgh as a consort that can support the king when he becomes king. And I think that's the role we've seen, and you've seen when you've been travelling on royal tours, that they are very tactile, they're very together, they obviously understand each other's role. She understands William's role as the lead, and he, when he makes his speeches, you can see they've obviously discussed them and practiced them together, and she's very much an encouraging person. You've got to remember they've been together since their early 20s, so I mean they know each other very well.
Okay, Robert Jobson, author of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, thank you so much for joining us, and that biography is out now.
Thank you.
So you're either going to love us or hate us for the next topic, and that is because we cannot ignore, I'm afraid, that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have just completed a 4-day tour to Colombia. Call it a royal tour if you want, maybe not quite such a royal tour. There was a lot of control, I think, Svar, with this tour, which is fair enough, because they left as working members of the royal family because they wanted control. They wanted to do things their way and not be bound by the terms of the royal rota, which meant they had one pool journalist with them from an American publication who was covering all of the various engagements, and we were given brief pool copy from each engagement. But the thing that struck me the most was that all the official photographs, all the official video feeds of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex all came from their own team. Fair enough, it makes Meghan look amazing, it makes Harry look amazing. But all the video was mute, which meant it was really hard to report on it because you didn't hear what Harry and Meghan said, and there was no nice atmosphere of crowds cheering or anything like that. It was really odd.
Yeah, it was strange and different to obviously other royal tours that we've seen, but it is about that level of control. I think the Sussexes wanted it to go well. We saw a similar sort of style with their trip to Nigeria in May, and maybe this is just how they're going to move forward with these international engagements, that it's all very much on their terms.
Yeah, and there was no major controversy. I think if you look at the trip as a whole, I think it was ultimately a success for them because they got their messages out there. They got women's empowerment with Meghan yesterday, particularly talking about Princess Lilibet finding her voice, and she got her message out there that Prince Harry is listening to her as a wife and respecting her views, and her saying that young boys need to be taught to listen to girls as well, kind of ending misogyny, that kind of thing. Then we had the online safety and cyberbullying and misinformation. And we had Prince Harry at the Invictus Games with the Colombian team Invictus Games engagement. So they got all of that out there. But there wasn't much coverage from what I could see from across the UK media or indeed in Colombia. In fact, a couple of people, Colombians, were talking to The Telegraph. He said they'd never heard of Meghan, which was a shock to me, actually.
Yeah, that was interesting. A lot of the Colombian locals that were speaking to UK outlets said they were unaware of Meghan and Harry. There was a report that one Colombian said that they knew about the late Queen but had no idea who Meghan and Harry were. On the flip side of that, though, there are absolutely no security issues with Meghan and Harry, which is something that I think they would have been obviously worried about. We know how passionate Harry is about his family's security, and that in that sense, it went off without a hitch. So I think it was a mixed bag, but overall they got the message across that they wanted to. We saw, as you mentioned, them touch on the Invictus Games and further publicity for some of the projects they're working on. So there was a lot for them to be happy about, but it was reported in a different way to how we're used to.
Yeah, and there was some great photo ops for them, and Meghan had a number of outfit changes, and she looks very glam, as you can probably expect. She's very good at working the cameras. Ironically, the biggest line, I would say, from a whole 4-day tour was something that wasn't in the pool copy we were given from a journalist and not from their cameras, and that was Prince Harry appearing to wade in on the recent UK riots by saying that, something can be said on, I'm paraphrasing, but something can be said online, and within minutes people are taking to the streets, referring to the misinformation which sparks the riots here in the UK. So that was picked up by another camera purely by chance, and that wasn't perhaps part of the PR plan for them, and yet that was the big line.
Yeah, I suppose Harry will argue that it was part of him spreading awareness of the dangers of social media, which we've seen him talk about extensively. But yeah, it could very well be interpreted that it was a reference to the riots that we saw in the UK recently.
Yeah, and as we said, the tour, there was no security issues, so that's good, and they're safely back in California now. But talking of security issues, Prince Andrew appears to have lost or is about to lose his security, according to The Sun on Sunday. King Charles is pulling his privately funded security. The King privately funded his security from from 2022, when British taxpayers' police protection was taken off Prince Andrew because he's no longer a working member of the royal family. What does this mean for the King's brother?
Well, it looks like a clear escalation in their ongoing feud over Royal Lodge. Andrew currently lives in the 30-room royal residence, and he is pretty adamant that he's not going to downsize. Charles is keen for him to find an alternative property, and Frogmore Cottage, which obviously Meghan and Harry used to stay at as their UK base, that is something Andrew is not keen on taking up. Andrew has a lease on Royal Lodge. He signed it in 2003, a 75-year lease, so it's got over 5 decades to go. But whether he'll be as comfortable there knowing there isn't a private funded security team, which was apparently costing the King's millions to fund every year. So yeah, it's certainly an escalation, and yeah, we'll have to see what the next move is there.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is, you look at the Windsor estate and you've got the castle, obviously, and you've got all of the grounds with all the various properties, including Frogmore Cottage, as you mentioned, where reportedly Prince Andrew is being persuaded to try and move into. You've got Adelaide Cottage, where the Prince and Princess of Wales with their 3 children, and all the other properties. Royal Lodge is in its own separate bit, not part of that guarded Windsor perimeter with the police protection anyway, which means more security has to be paid for to guard Royal Lodge, specifically that one property. So the argument is that it's more cost effective if Prince Andrew moves into a property within the already guarded Windsor estate, because you've got working members of the royal family within that, and therefore we don't need to pay for that extra money. But I mean, Prince Andrew can't live there without security, because although he's no longer a working member of the royal family, he's clearly still very high profile, clearly still the King's brother. But I don't think he's going to go quietly somehow, so perhaps watch this space, because he's not... He is used to living in a big palatial style mansion, which he's not going to get with Frogmore Cottage.
And there are reports that Andrew intends to pass on his lease to Beatrice and Eugenie even after he dies. Now, whether that's something... whether that's something Beatrice and Eugenie would be interested in is a completely different topic.
I'd argue probably not.
Yeah, because they've got their own lives, they're very settled, and also it would involve them being dragged into this royal feud. But if that is his intention, then it means he's planning to see out his time at Royal Lodge and then create a further headache for King Charles in this messy feud.
Well, the other issue might be because the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife, also lives within Royal Lodge, and moving from a 30-bedroom house into a cottage where you might be, kind of in the same room, or forced to be kind of in the same lounge all the time, will that cause issues? I guess we'll find out, but we'll see. Watch this space. We'll keep you updated on that one. Prince Harry, though, for some reason in my head, I thought Prince Harry was already 40. He's not 40. He turns 40 on the 15th of September, and the Sunday Times did a big spread with Roy Nika, royal editor of the Sunday Times, did a big spread this weekend on a big profile of Prince Harry and what's next for him as he turns 40. Some very interesting sources speaking to Roy there, particularly the one which I found quite interesting was an old friend of William's, or a friend of William's, who was saying that Prince Harry would not be welcome at William's coronation, whenever that may be.
I mean, if that is true, it really shows how how far the brothers have got to mend this feud, and if William would even whether William would even be interested in it. It casts a doubt over that. It would be such a high profile snub. We obviously saw Harry go to Charles's coronation in May 2023 last year. Meghan chose not to appear. Another line in that Sunday Times report that really struck me was how Harry feels that he's lost close friends over the last few years, with one friend of Harry telling the publication 3 strikes and you're out, and that they felt that the combination of the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, and then Spare was too much for too many attacks on the royal family, and that they felt that they couldn't associate with Harry anymore, and have since distanced themselves. So there were some really hard-hitting quotes from people that are apparently very close to Harry.
And you know what the common theme of that is? Oprah, the book, and Netflix, all of it was looking back to the past. And what was also alleged, if that's the right word, in that feature was that Meghan and others really want Harry to start looking forward now, rather than looking back on his past and being bitter about it, and try and, you know, look towards the future. Him as a father with 2 young children who he clearly cares for deeply, him carving out a role for himself in this future world, rather than constantly looking back and constantly getting angry with the various legal lawsuits he's got against British tabloids, the lawsuit he's still got going on with the Home Office over police protection, and even the person closest to Harry, Meghan, at the moment, wanting him to look forward. And will Harry be persuaded by that advice?
Yeah, and it was said that Harry felt that part-time working royal role that he and Meghan initially went for, before it was agreed that it wasn't possible and they stepped away from the monarchy, that was his perfect scenario. And so there's still a part of him, when looking back at the royal family, there's still a part of him that wanted that, and maybe still hopes for that. What we're hearing with his relationship with William, I don't think that's ever going to happen. It seems to be completely off the table. It's obviously not happening under King Charles, and it certainly looks like it won't happen under William. Yeah,
maybe there's a lot of nostalgia there for Prince Harry, having lost. What did really hurt him was losing his military titles when the late Queen took those away. So I guess we'll have to see when the security issue is kind of resolved. If it is ever resolved, then we will see if there is more of a return to the United Kingdom from Prince Harry and indeed Meghan and their 2 children. But we'll have to wait and see. Well, that's it for another week of The Royal Record. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can get in contact, royal@gbnews.uk, or use the hashtag GBNRoyalRecord.
And don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest royal news and analysis by going to gbnews.com/royal, or by signing up to the Royal newsletter.
See you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.